Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is September 9th, and it is the best day of the week here on the Fitness Athlete or the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Fitness Athlete Friday. Excited to talk with y'all today after a couple of months off for me on the podcast. So today we're going to be talking about the utilization of isometrics in the clinic in three different areas that I think that they're incredibly valuable to use. Prior to jumping into that discussion, we got a couple of upcoming fitness athlete courses coming all over the country. So in September, I'm going to be in Rochester, New York. We'll also have a course going on in Rome, Georgia, and Austin, Texas. And then in October, 3 courses, Salt Lake City, Chicago, and Charlotte. So check those out at ptonice.com if you want to catch the fitness athlete crew live on the road. So let's jump into today's podcast where we're going to be talking about the utilization of isometrics in the clinic and times where that could be incredibly valuable for your patients in terms of building strength and reducing pain, getting them back to the things that they love. So we're going to first start talking about isometrics in the context of dealing with somebody's pain that's in front of you. So one of my favorite research studies in terms of this is from Ebony Rio in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, where she took volleyball players that had patellar tendinopathy and they had them do isometric leg extensions. So they did 5 sets of 45-second holds of that isometric contraction. And what they saw was that these volleyball players had immediate significant reductions in their patellar tendon pain that then lasted for 45 minutes. They didn't track it beyond 45 minutes, but I mean, we're talking about girls that had 7, 8, 9 out of 10 pain dropping down to 1, 2, or 0 out of 10 pain immediately after doing those isometrics and holding that for 45 minutes, which is just fantastic because if you can do that, that's going to be enough time very frequently to allow individuals to then get their workout in, to play in their sports games, whatever it is. So isometrics incredibly powerful at times for people with tendinopathy. So always keep that one in your back pocket. Obviously, there's been some research lately that has questioned that in other tendinopathies, but in my experience, I just try it with everybody that has a tendinopathy that shows up in the clinic. If they respond really positively to that, then we're for sure going to leverage that in terms of a pain reduction tool. The second time that I really like to use isometrics in individuals that are having pain is more for that individual that has like that pinpoint angle of joint pain. So for instance, I have a lady right now that's got pretty significant arthritis pain in her knee. And when we hit about 90 degrees of knee flexion in any exercise, she gets really sharp pain that has made it very difficult for her to progress her strength. She tried prior to seeing me, she tried doing a lot of other strengthening exercises, but she was not making any progress. And what's really helped us with this individual lately is using isometrics all around that 90 degrees of knee flexion where it hurts. So if you remember way back into PT school or exercise science school, anytime they talked about isometrics, a lot of times we would discuss this range of motion where about 10 degrees above and below the angle that you train that isometric at, we tend to see strength improvement. So I like to leverage that with people that have very intense pain at a specific portion of the range of motion, like this lady. So what we would do with her is 2 different exercises to train below that angle and above that angle. And with both of these, we try to get as close to that specific position as we could without significantly aggravating her symptoms. So the first exercise we would do would be a split squat. But we actually started down at the bottom. So she started down with her front foot, back foot on the ground, and one of her knees down on the ground. And she would basically lift off of the ground and hold an isometric right below where her pain started to really kick in from that joint angle perspective. And that would be exercise number 1 in like a rehab EMOM for her. And exercise 2 were lateral step downs. And so she would do a step down, and we would have the height of the step adjusted so that right at the bottom, right before her foot touched the ground, she was right above that knee joint angle, and she would pause and hold that for a couple seconds before returning back upright. And what we've noticed over the last few weeks is that range of motion that was painful is getting a little lower and lower and lower, and it's becoming more distinct as we use those isometrics to build strength around what was previously really painful. So those are the 2 ways that I really like to use isometrics in terms of pain. The next thing I want to cover is isometrics in terms of a mobility program. So there are two different ways that I really like to use this. Number one is I'm sure we're all familiar with like PNF style stretching, where we do a static stretch and then we do some isometric muscle contractions. I think this could be a really valuable way to improve some mobility gains. As you've seen, if you've done PNF style stretching, or if you've had your patients do it, when they do those isometric contractions after holding that static stretch, afterwards, you'll see when they go back into the static stretch, typically they're going to have several more degrees of range of motion in terms of whatever we're stretching, because those isometric contractions just get certain structures to relax a little bit, let us go through a little bit more range of motion, so that then, we're making more mobility gains a little bit quicker. But what I think we really undervalue in terms of that is the utilization of really intense isometric contractions. Like when I have somebody doing this, I want them pushing all out into that stretch, both into the stretch and out of the stretch, but we're staying in an isometric contraction. You can look up Pales and Rails, progressive and regressive angular isometric loading strategies as an example of this. But those really intense isometrics combined with static stretching is not only going to open up that little bit more range of motion, but it's also going to start to build some strength in those newly acquired ranges of motion, which is going to be really valuable, because we don't want to open up range of motion without strength, number one. But number two, it seems to be like when you add in that strength component, individuals then will feel or their body will then kind of hit save a little bit more on those mobility changes. They won't see quite as drastic of the up and downs that we typically see when individuals just perform static stretching. The second way that I really like to use isometrics in terms of building mobility is with eccentric isometrics. So I'm sure you've all seen some of the research in terms of mobility training, where when we perform eccentric muscle contractions, we see really significant improvements in individuals' mobility. Well, I like to take that up a notch. While we not only do the eccentric, like lowering down slow with the heavy load, I like to then pause at that in-range position for a couple of seconds. And that combination of slow eccentric and pause in the bottom, I think is just really, really great for building mobility as well as strength as we start to open up some more range of motion. So use isometric contractions a lot in your mobility plans as well. And then the final way I really like to use isometrics is more for my performance-based clients, or people that we're really trying to hone in on specific things from a technical breakdown that may have been leading to their pain. And that's when we're doing really heavy isometrics in terms of our loading. And there's two different ways you'll typically see in the strength world isometrics discussed. Those are yielding and overcoming isometrics. So we're going to start with overcoming isometrics. Overcoming isometrics are basically when you're performing an isometric muscle contraction against an immovable object. So imagine we're standing in a power rack with a barbell resting down on the ground, and then we have safety bars positioned somewhere above the barbell. And you perform a deadlift, but as you start lifting the weight up, that barbell runs into those safety pins at whatever height you have them set. And no matter how hard you pull into that barbell, you cannot move that power rack because it's bolted to the ground. That is an example of an overcoming isometric. And those are incredibly neurologically taxing, because you are putting out an all-out effort trying to move that bar, but it's not going anywhere. That is a fantastic way to build some absolute strength and really improve somebody's strength. Where I like to position that overcoming isometric is typically in that position where I see their technique break down or that person fail a lift. So in the deadlift, for example, you'll very commonly find that people fail very consistently at a certain position. So maybe they can get the bar just barely started off the ground, but once they get 2 inches off the ground, it can't budge anymore. Or a lot of times it happens right at about the knee level. Well, wherever that is, that's where I'm going to set up the isometric, and we're going to get a little bit of extra strength work in that specific range of motion. I don't have any research to support this, but you will hear people in the strength and conditioning world say that these overcoming isometrics are a little bit better in terms of improving concentric strength, and the yielding isometrics that we'll talk about in a second, they'll say are a little bit better at improving eccentric strength as well as muscle hypertrophy. So that was overcoming isometrics, where you're pushing into an immovable object. Yielding isometrics are where you're utilizing a load that you can move through a full range of motion, but you're pausing at specific points in it. You're yielding and slowing down, essentially. So an example of this, if we're sticking with the deadlift, could be, let's say that this is that same individual that tends to fail their deadlifts, or their technique starts to break down when the bar gets to knee level. So we have them perform a deadlift where they lift the bar up, They pause at the portion where the bar is at their knees. They hold that for 1 to 3 seconds, and then they finish through with the lift. You can do those pauses either on the concentric portion of the lift or on the eccentric portion of the lift. Really dealer's choice in terms of what you want to do there. Oftentimes I'll have individuals pause at multiple positions in the lift, especially with things like the Olympic lifts. When I'm trying to really hone in somebody's form, I might have them pull the bar 1 inch off the ground, pause for a second, pull the bar to their knees, pause for a second, pull the bar to the power position, pause for a second, and then finally stand up with like a snatch grip deadlift as an example of that. So you can do multiple pauses. Again, it can be concentrically, it could be eccentrically, but both yielding and overcoming isometrics are going to be great ways to start building strength and really working on honing in somebody's technique in the specific areas they need it. So isometrics, fantastic to use in the clinic. Use those for pain, use those for mobility, and use those for improving absolute strength as well as dialing in somebody's technique. Hope that gives you some good ideas in terms of some other ways to start progressing people in the clinic. And we look forward to seeing you next time here on the PT on Ice Daily Show. Have a great weekend, everybody.